The first thing I noticed wasn't the silence in my empty house or the stack of unpaid bills on my kitchen counter. It was the smell of Sandra's perfume still lingering in my hallway. Expensive, cloying, the kind that announces itself like a death knell. My daughter-in-law had been here yesterday, rifling through my jewelry box again under the pretense of helping me organize. I stood in my doorway at 63, watching the November rain streak down my windows and felt the familiar weight of being invisible in my own life. The house that had once buzzed with holiday preparations and family dinners now echoed with the hollow sound of my own footsteps. My daughters Nancy and Lisa had their own lives now. Successful careers, beautiful homes, husbands who provided everything I never could after their father died. They didn't need me anymore, except when they did. The phone rang, cutting through my thoughts like a blade. Mom. Nancy's voice carried that particular tone I'd learned to recognize. Bright, urgent, slightly breathless. We have the most devastating news. I lowered myself into my reading chair, the one with the worn armrest where I'd spent countless evenings waiting for calls that came less and less frequently. What's that, sweetheart? Lisa and we've planned something incredible. A mother-daughter cruise. Just the three of us like old times. Can you believe it? The Mediterranean, Mom. 15 days of pure luxury. My heart stuttered violently. When was the last time they'd wanted to spend 15 minutes with me, let alone 15 days? That sounds wonderful, but we leave next week. Lisa's voice joined in, sharp as broken glass. They had me on speaker. I realized. We've already booked everything. The Oceanic Grandeur. One of those ships with the glass elevators and the French restaurants. You're going to love it. The enthusiasm in their voices felt manufactured like the smile I'd worn at their last birthday parties when they'd given me gift cards instead of presents. Girls, I'm not sure I can afford. Don't be silly, Nancy interrupted, her voice cutting like ice. We'll handle all the details. You just need to pack and show up. Consider it our treat. Their treat. I closed my eyes, remembering the last time they treated me to something. A Mother's Day brunch where they'd spent the entire meal on their phones, coordinating schedules that somehow never included me. But this felt different. 15 days together. Maybe we could find our way back to each other. That's incredibly generous of you both. We love you, Mom, Lisa said, and for a moment, I almost believed the warmth in her voice was real. We know things have been hard since Dad died. We want to make new memories together. After I hung up, I sat in my chair for a long time, watching the rain, and feeling something I hadn't felt in months. Hope. Maybe I'd been wrong about them. Maybe they did need me, want me, love me the way I'd always loved them, fiercely and without condition. The next morning, I found myself in the travel agency downtown. A small storefront wedged between a dry cleaner and a coffee shop. The agent, a woman about my age with kind eyes, spread brochures across her desk. The Oceanic Grandeur, she said, pulling out a glossy pamphlet. Beautiful ship. Very expensive. How expensive? She showed me the rates, and my breath caught like a fish hook in my throat. Even the cheapest interior cabin cost more than I spent on groceries in 3 months. Are you sure this is the right ship? My daughter said they were handling the arrangements. Let me check. Her fingers flew across her keyboard. Yes, here we are. 3 passengers departing next Tuesday. 2 ocean view suites in one. She paused, frowning at her screen like she'd seen something obscene. 1 what? 1 interior cabin. The smallest category they offer. She looked up at me with something that might have been pity. Is that what you expected? The hope in my chest began to curdle like spoiled milk. Could you tell me who made the booking? More typing. A Nancy Hartwell and Lisa Reynolds. Payment was made on a credit card ending in 4712. My credit card. I drove home in a daze, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles went white. The card ending in 4712 was supposed to be for emergencies only. The one I'd given them access to after Bruce died when I was drowning in medical bills and funeral expenses and couldn't think straight. They'd promised to use it only if I needed help. Only if I asked. At home, I called my bank with shaking fingers. Mrs. Morrison, yes, I can see the transaction. $42,000 charged yesterday to Celestial Cruise Lines. 42,000. The number hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. That's correct. Would you like me to read you the details? I listened in growing horror as she itemized the charges. 2 luxury suites with private balconies, specialty dining packages, spa treatments, shore excursions, premium beverage packages, and what appeared to be every possible upgrade available. And tucked at the bottom, almost as an afterthought, one interior cabin with no amenities. There's also a note here, the representative continued, her voice taking on an ominous tone. The booking was made with special instructions that all charges be applied to the account holder, that's you, with automatic approval for any additional expenses during the voyage. I hung up without saying goodbye. The house felt smaller suddenly, the walls pressing in on me like a coffin. I walked to my kitchen window and stared out at the small garden Bruce and I had planted together 30 years ago. The roses were dormant now, their thorny branches bare against the gray sky. Just like me, I thought, stripped of everything beautiful, left with only the parts that could hurt. My phone buzzed with a text from Nancy. So excited for our trip. Don't pack too much. There's not much storage in your room. Face blowing a kiss, the emoji felt like a slap across my face. I sat at my kitchen table and opened my laptop, my fingers moving with a purpose I hadn't felt in years. First, I called the bank again. I need to report fraudulent charges, I said, my voice steady for the first time in months. Ma'am, these charges were made with a card registered to your account. With your authorization I'm now revoking. I want to report this card as stolen. There was a pause. Are you saying someone stole your physical card? I'm saying someone stole my trust and $42,000. The bureaucratic wheels began to turn. Reports were filed. Investigations were opened. The charges were frozen pending review. I provided documentation showing the pattern of my typical spending. Grocery stores, utility bills, the occasional book or coffee shop purchase. Nothing even remotely approaching a luxury cruise. Then I did something that would have been unthinkable just hours earlier. I changed all my passwords, every account, every automatic payment, every digital footprint that connected me to my daughters. I locked them out of everything. By evening, my phone was ringing constantly. Nancy first, then Lisa, their voices growing increasingly shrill with each unanswered call. Finally, a text arrived that made my hands shake like autumn leaves. Mom, there's some kind of mistake with the payment. The cruise line is saying there's an issue with your card. Can you call them? We leave in 3 days. I turned off my phone and sat in my chair, watching the darkness settle over my empty house. For the first time in years, the silence didn't feel like abandonment. It felt like freedom. Part 2. I slept better that night than I had in months, but morning brought the sound of car doors slamming in my driveway like gunshots. Through my bedroom window, I watched Nancy's black Mercedes and Lisa's silver BMW park side by side, their engines still running like getaway cars. My heart hammered against my ribs as I pulled on my robe and walked downstairs. The doorbell rang 3 times in rapid succession, followed by aggressive knocking that shook the door frame. Mom, open up. Nancy's voice carried a note I'd never heard before. Desperation wrapped in barely controlled rage. We know you're in there. I stood in my entryway, my hand on the doorknob, and felt something shift inside me like tectonic plates. For 38 years, I'd opened doors for them, literally and figuratively. Every time they needed money, advice, babysitting, or just someone to blame for their disappointments, I'd opened that door. But now, with my back pressed against the cool wood, I discovered something remarkable. I didn't have to. Mom, please. Lisa's voice joined in, softer, but no less urgent. There's been some terrible mistake. The cruise line says our payment was declined. We need to talk. I closed my eyes and remembered the last family dinner I'd hosted. Bruce's birthday, 2 months before he died. Nancy had spent the entire evening on her phone while Lisa complained about the food. Neither had helped with dishes. Nancy's husband, Charles, had fallen asleep on my couch after drinking my wine, and their children had torn through my house like vandals while their parents ignored them completely. I'd cleaned for 3 days afterward, finding broken ornaments and crayon marks on my walls. We can see your car in the garage. Nancy's voice rose to a near shriek. Stop being ridiculous and answer the door. Ridiculous. The word hit me like a physical blow. How many times had they called me that over the years? Ridiculous for saving their childhood artwork. Ridiculous for wanting family photos at Christmas. Ridiculous for crying at Bruce's funeral while they worried about how long the service was taking. I walked to my kitchen and made coffee, my hand steady despite the continued pounding on my front door. The morning sun streamed through my windows, warming my face as I sat at the small table Bruce and I had bought at a garage sale 40 years ago. Simple, sturdy, built to last, unlike the trust I'd had in my daughters. My phone, which I'd turned back on, buzzed constantly. Text after text, each more frantic than the last. Nancy, Mom, this isn't funny anymore. We leave tomorrow. Lisa, the cruise line says you reported the card stolen. What's wrong with you? Nancy, do you have any idea how embarrassing this is? We already told everyone we're going. Lisa, you're being vindictive and petty. Dad would be ashamed. That last text made my coffee cup rattle against its saucer like chattering teeth. Bruce would be ashamed of them maybe. He'd spent his last months watching our daughters visit only when they needed something. Their hands always out, their attention always elsewhere. In his final days, when morphine couldn't touch the pain anymore, he'd whispered to me, "Don't let them take everything, Margaret. Promise me you won't disappear." I'd promised. And for 8 months after his funeral, I'd broken that promise daily, shrinking smaller and smaller until I was barely a shadow in my own life. The pounding stopped suddenly, and I heard their voices through the door, muffled but distinct. Told you we should have waited until after the cruise to give her the news. Nancy was saying. How was I supposed to know she'd checked the charges? Lisa's voice was sharp with irritation. She never pays attention to anything anymore. Well, she's paying attention now. Jesus. $42,000. Do you think she'll really press charges against her own daughters? Please. She's just throwing a tantrum because we didn't ask permission first. She'll get over it. My blood turned to ice water. They thought this was a tantrum, a phase, something to wait out until I came to my senses and resumed my role as their personal ATM. I stood up so quickly my chair scraped against the floor like fingernails on a chalkboard. The conversation outside stopped abruptly. What news? I called through the door, my voice carrying in the morning air. What news were you going to give me after the cruise? Silence, then whispered arguing I couldn't quite make out. Mom, Nancy finally said, her voice artificially bright again. Let's talk about this inside like a family. We are talking. What news, Nancy? More silence. I could picture them exchanging glances, debating how much to reveal. Finally, Lisa spoke, her words careful and measured. We were going to tell you that, well, we think it's time for you to consider making some changes. This house is too big for you now, and the upkeep is expensive. There are lovely senior communities. You want to sell my house?" The words came out flat, emotionless. "Not sell," Nancy jumped in quickly. "More like help you transition. Charles knows a really good realtor and Lisa's husband Matthew works in estate management. We could handle everything for you. Make sure you get a fair price." "A fair price?" I laughed, the sound harsh and unfamiliar even to my own ears. "And where would I live while you're handling everything for me?" "Well, there's this beautiful place about an hour from here, Sunset Manor. They have activities and meal service and you wouldn't have to worry about anything anymore." Sunset Manor. I knew that place. A warehouse for inconvenient relatives where families deposited their elderly like unwanted luggage. I'd driven past it once and seen the residents sitting in wheelchairs by the windows, staring out at a parking lot like prisoners watching the free world. "An hour away," I repeated. "It's not that far," Lisa said defensively. "We could visit on weekends when it's convenient." "Mom, you're twisting our words. We're trying to help you." I pressed my forehead against the door, feeling the cool wood against my skin. "Help me." They wanted to help me right out of my home, my independence, my life. Park me somewhere convenient while they divided up the proceeds from selling everything Bruce and I had built together. "The cruise," I said slowly, "was a farewell tour, wasn't it? One last mother-daughter trip before you shuffled me off to die." "Don't be so dramatic," Nancy snapped, her false sweetness finally cracking like old paint. "People your age live in communities like that all the time. It's normal." People your age. As if 63 was ancient. As if I was already dead and just too stubborn to lie down. "Look," Lisa said, "we're going to be late for our flight if we don't resolve this. Can you just call the bank and tell them it was a mistake? We'll talk about everything else when we get back." When they got back from their luxury vacation, paid for with my money. While I sat at home contemplating which assisted living facility would be my final stop, I walked away from the door without another word and climbed the stairs to my bedroom. From my window, I watched them argue in my driveway for another 10 minutes before finally driving away. Nancy's tires left black marks on my pavement like scars. Alone again, I sat on the edge of my bed and looked around the room I'd shared with Bruce for 35 years. His side of the closet still held his clothes, and his reading glasses sat on the nightstand next to a half-finished crossword puzzle. I'd been saving everything, preserving it like a shrine, afraid that letting go of his things would mean letting go of him. But Bruce wasn't in those objects. He was in the garden we'd planted, the memories we'd made, the promises we'd shared. And one of those promises was that I wouldn't let our daughters erase me. I pulled out my laptop and began typing with a purpose that surprised me. Email after email, each one deliberate and final. I canceled the automatic payments that connected my accounts to their expenses. Nancy's gym membership, Lisa's car insurance, the credit cards I'd foolishly agreed to guarantee when they were just starting out 15 years ago. Then I called my lawyer, Daniel Webb, a kind man who'd handled Bruce's will and had known our family for decades. "Margaret, what can I do for you?" "I need to change my will," I said without preamble. "Completely." There was a pause. "That's certainly your right. May I ask what's prompting this decision?" I told him about the cruise, the conversation I'd overheard, their plans for my future. My voice remained steady throughout, as if I were discussing the weather rather than dismantling my children's expectations. "I see," he said when I finished. "And what would you like your new arrangements to be?" I looked out my window at the garden, at the bird feeder Bruce had built, at the apple tree we'd planted the year Nancy was born. "I'm not sure yet, but I know what I don't want. I don't want them to inherit the consequences of their choices without facing any consequences themselves." "I understand. Why don't you come in next week? We'll have plenty of time to discuss your options." After I hung up, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Control. Not the illusion of control that came from keeping everyone else happy, but real control over my own life and future. My phone rang. Nancy again. This time, I answered. Thank God, she breathed. Mom, you scared us. We're at the airport and, have a wonderful trip, I said calmly. What? I said, have a wonderful trip. The Mediterranean is beautiful this time of year. But what about the payment? The cruise line says, I'm sure you'll figure something out. You're both very resourceful women. Mom, we can't afford this without my money. I finished her sentence for her. Yes, I imagine that's quite a problem. The silence stretched between us, filled with everything we weren't saying. Finally, Nancy spoke, her voice smaller than I'd heard it in years. Are you really going to let us miss this cruise? After everything we've planned? I thought about all the things I'd missed over the years because they'd been too busy. Birthdays when they'd sent cards instead of visiting. Holidays when they divided their time between Bruce and me and their in-laws, measuring minutes like rations. The loneliness of evenings when I'd cooked for 3 and eaten alone because they'd cancelled at the last minute. Nancy, I said gently, you're going to miss a lot more than a cruise. And then I hung up. The house settled around me in the gathering twilight, and for the first time since Bruce died, I wasn't afraid of the silence. Tomorrow, they'd be on a ship somewhere in the Atlantic, discovering what it felt like to want something they couldn't have. The irony wasn't lost on me. They'd finally get their mother-daughter trip, just not the way they'd planned. I made myself dinner and ate it slowly, tasting every bite. Then I went to Bruce's computer and began researching something I'd never considered before. Travel insurance for one. Part 3. 3 days passed in blissful silence. No calls, no texts, no unexpected visits. I imagined Nancy and Lisa somewhere in the middle of the Atlantic, frantically trying to explain to cruise staff why their credit cards were being declined for every champagne toast and spa treatment they'd planned. The thought should have brought me satisfaction, but instead I felt something deeper, a cold, crystalline clarity I hadn't experienced in years. On Thursday morning, I was watering Bruce's orchids when the doorbell rang. Through the frosted glass, I could see a figure in a dark suit, too tall to be either of my daughters. When I opened the door, a young woman with kind eyes and an official badge smiled at me. Mrs. Morrison, I'm Special Agent Diana Reed with the FBI Financial Crimes Division. May I come in? My heart skipped, but my voice remained steady. Of course. She settled into Bruce's favorite chair while I poured coffee, her presence somehow both intimidating and reassuring. I understand you reported fraudulent charges on your credit card. $42,000, I said, sitting across from her, charged by my daughters without my knowledge or consent. Agent Reed opened a tablet and began scrolling through what I assumed was my case file. The bank's investigation flagged some irregularities. This isn't the first time charges have been made on your account by these individuals. What do you mean? Over the past 18 months, there have been numerous charges totaling approximately $68,000. Restaurants, shopping, car payments, insurance premiums, all authorized by the secondary card holders, Nancy Hartwell and Lisa Reynolds. $68,000. I set my coffee cup down carefully, afraid my shaking hands would betray the earthquake happening inside my chest. I knew about some of it. They said they were going through difficult times. Mrs. Morrison, when someone uses another person's financial resources without explicit consent for each transaction, especially when there's a pattern of escalating amounts, it constitutes financial elder abuse. The cruise charges were simply the largest single transaction. Elder abuse. The words hit me like ice water. I wasn't just a victim of my daughter's selfishness. I was a statistic, a cautionary tale. One of those pitiful stories you read about in the newspaper and shake your head at, wondering how someone could be so naive. What happens now? I asked. The investigation is ongoing. We've frozen the cruise booking and the cruise line has been cooperative. Your daughters. She paused, consulting her tablet. They're currently on board the Oceanic Grandeur, but they're being moved to a basic interior cabin and all premium services have been revoked. They'll be met by authorities when the ship docks in Barcelona tomorrow. The image of Nancy and Lisa being escorted off a cruise ship by Spanish police should have horrified me. Instead, I felt nothing but a quiet sense of justice. Will they be arrested? That depends partly on you. As the victim, you have the right to press charges or seek restitution through civil means. But Mrs. Morrison, I need to ask, is there anything else you think I should know? Any other financial irregularities or concerning behavior? I thought about Sandra Waters rifling through my jewelry box, about Charles Smith's casual assumption that he could handle my house sale, about Matthew Kirk's expertise in estate management. How long had they been planning this? How many family dinners had been strategy sessions for dividing up my life? There might be, I said slowly. My daughters mentioned that their husbands had already been making arrangements for selling my house, managing my affairs. I don't think any of it was legal yet, but Agent Reed made notes. We'll look into that. In the meantime, I'd recommend you secure all your accounts, review any legal documents you've signed recently, and consider consulting with an attorney about asset protection. After she left, I sat in my kitchen and called Daniel Webb again. Margaret, I was just thinking about you. How are you holding up? I've had better weeks, I said dryly. Daniel, I need to ask you something. In the past 2 years since Bruce died, have any documents been filed regarding my property or affairs? Anything I might not remember signing? There was a pause. Let me check our records. Yes, actually. There was a power of attorney document filed about 6 months ago. Limited scope, but it gave Nancy authority to make certain financial decisions on your behalf if you became incapacitated. My blood turned to ice. I never signed any power of attorney. The document has your signature, Margaret. It was notarized and filed properly, but now that you mention it, the circumstances were unusual. Nancy brought it in herself. Said you were too upset about something to come in person, but had asked her to handle it. Too upset about something. I remembered 6 months ago. It was right after I'd found out about Bruce's secret medical bills, the ones that had been piling up while he tried to protect me from the financial stress. I'd been crying for days, barely able to function. Nancy had been so helpful, so supportive, offering to handle the paperwork stuff so I wouldn't have to deal with it. Daniel, I said carefully, if someone forged my signature on a legal document, what would be the consequences? Forgery of a legal document is a felony, Margaret, but we'd need to prove it wasn't your signature. Do you think? I think my daughters have been planning my obsolescence longer than I realized. Bring me any documents you can find at home. Bank statements, anything they might have had you sign. We'll sort this out. That afternoon, I went through every drawer, every file, every stack of papers in my house. What I found made my hands shake with rage. Insurance beneficiary changes I didn't remember making. A reverse mortgage application with my signature, thankfully never completed, but how close had I come to losing my home entirely? And most damning of all, tucked behind Bruce's death certificate, a handwritten note in Nancy's handwriting. Mom's house appraised at $340,000. Split 4 ways after taxes equals $75,000 each. Sunset Manor deposit equals $25,000. Net equals $50,000 each. Not bad for a year's work. 4 ways. Nancy, Lisa, Charles, and Matthew. They'd carved up my life like a pie before I was even gone. I photographed everything and drove to Daniel's office, my hands steady on the steering wheel despite the fury burning in my chest. He examined the documents with the thoroughness of a forensic accountant, occasionally muttering under his breath. "Margaret, I'm afraid this is worse than we thought. The power of attorney document, I've compared it to your signature on Bruce's will and other documents. It's a very good forgery, but it's definitely not your handwriting. The pressure patterns are wrong, and there are several letter formations that don't match your natural hand." "What does that mean?" "It means your daughters committed fraud to gain access to your financial affairs. Combined with the FBI investigation into the credit card charges, they're looking at serious federal and state charges." My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Mom, they took our phones, but I borrowed one. Please call the American Embassy in Barcelona. This is all a misunderstanding. We love you. Nancy." I showed the text to Daniel, who raised his eyebrows. "They're asking you to help them, apparently. Will you?" I thought about the question seriously. 24 hours ago, I might have. The old Margaret, the one who'd spent 38 years putting her daughter's needs before her own, might have been on the next plane to Spain with a lawyer and bail money. But that Margaret had died somewhere between discovering the cruise charges and finding Nancy's handwritten calculation of my worth. This Margaret, the one sitting in Daniel's office holding evidence of her daughter's betrayal, felt nothing but cold satisfaction at their panic. "No," I said simply. "Are you sure? This is your last chance to minimize the legal consequences for them." "Daniel, they weren't planning to minimize the consequences for me. They were planning to warehouse me in a nursing home and sell everything Bruce and I built together. They forged legal documents and stole nearly $70,000. They treated me like an obstacle to overcome rather than a person to love." I folded the documents carefully and put them back in my purse. They made their choices. Now they get to live with them. That evening, I did something I hadn't done since Bruce died. I cooked a real dinner. Pot roast with vegetables the way he'd loved it. I set the table with our good china and lit candles, creating a celebration for one. As I ate, I thought about the conversation I'd overheard outside my door 3 days ago. "She never pays attention to anything anymore." They'd been wrong about that, too. I was paying attention now, to everything. My phone rang during dessert, Bruce's favorite apple pie, which I'd made from scratch. Another unknown number. "Mom." Lisa's voice was small, scared. "Please, you have to help us. They're saying we can't leave Spain until this is resolved. Charles is talking about divorce and Matthew, he's blaming everything on Nancy. It's falling apart." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, cutting another bite of pie. "You're sorry. Mom, we're your daughters. We made a mistake, but we're family." "Family?" I repeated slowly. "Tell me, Lisa, when you were planning to put me in Sunset Manor, did you think about family then?" Silence. "When you forged my signature on legal documents, were you thinking about family?" "What forged?" "I don't know what you're talking about." "When you calculated that my house would be worth $75,000 to each of you after taxes, were you thinking about family?" Her sharp intake of breath told me she knew exactly what I was talking about. "Mom, please. We can fix this. We can make it right. You can't unforge documents, Lisa. You can't unspend $70,000. And you can't undo the fact that you saw me as a problem to solve rather than a person to love. But we do love you." "No," I said gently. "You love what I can provide. There's a difference." I hung up and turned off my phone. Tomorrow, Agent Reed would probably call with updates. Daniel would continue untangling the legal mess my daughters had created. The world would keep spinning while Nancy and Lisa faced the consequences of their choices. But tonight, I finished my pie in peaceful silence, surrounded by the home I'd fought to keep and the dignity I'd reclaimed. For the first time in 8 months, I wasn't waiting for anyone to call, visit, or need something from me. I was simply, completely, entirely free. Part 4. The morning brought unexpected visitors. I was tending to Bruce's orchids when I heard voices in my front yard. Not the angry, demanding tones of my daughters, but something softer. Through the window, I watched a teenage girl with dark hair arguing with a woman who looked vaguely familiar. "I don't care what Mom said," the girl was saying. "Grandma Margaret never hurt anybody. If she's in trouble, it's because someone else put her there." My heart caught. I recognized the voice before I recognized the face. Alexis Montgomery, my youngest granddaughter, Nancy's daughter, who I hadn't seen since Bruce's funeral 8 months ago. She was taller now, 16, and fierce in the way only teenagers could be when defending someone they loved. The woman with her was Sandra Waters, my daughter-in-law, looking uncomfortable and overdressed for a morning confrontation in sensible heels and a tailored coat. "Alexis, your mother specifically said, my mother is in jail in Spain," Alexis snapped. "Maybe her judgment isn't the best right now." I opened the front door before I could second-guess myself. "Alexis." She spun around and I saw Nancy's eyes in her face, but without the calculating coldness that had developed over the years. These eyes held warmth, concern, and something that looked like relief. "Grandma." She ran up the front steps and hugged me with the fierce intensity of someone who'd been told she might never see me again. "Are you okay? Dad said you were having some kind of breakdown, but you look fine to me." Sandra followed more cautiously, her expression unreadable. "Mrs. Morrison, I hope you don't mind us stopping by." Alexis was insistent. "She always has been," I said, remembering the little girl who used to demand extra bedtime stories and always chose the biggest cookie from my jar. "Come in, both of you." My kitchen felt different with people in it again, warmer, more alive. I made coffee while Alexis explored the house with the familiarity of someone who'd spent countless childhood hours here. Sandra sat stiffly at my table, clearly uncomfortable. "I suppose you've heard," I said, setting cups in front of them. "Some of it," Sandra admitted. He's very angry. He says you've ruined everything out of spite." "And what do you think?" Sandra was quiet for a long moment, stirring sugar into her coffee with precise movements. "I think," she said finally, "that I've watched your daughters treat you like an inconvenience for years and I've said nothing because it wasn't my place. But maybe it should have been." The admission hung in the air between us. Alexis returned from her exploration and plopped into the chair next to me with teenage grace. "Grandma, what really happened?" "Dad keeps saying you lost it and reported Mom's credit card stolen, but that doesn't make sense. Mom has her own credit cards." I looked at this young woman, so much like Nancy had been at that age, but with something Nancy had lost somewhere along the way. Honesty, maybe. Or the ability to see people as more than sources of money and convenience. "Your mother used my credit card to book a $42,000 cruise without asking me," I said simply. "When I discovered it, I reported it as fraud." Alexis's eyes widened. $42,000 for a cruise. 2 luxury suites, premium everything. And they were planning to tell me afterward that they thought I should sell this house and move to a nursing home. "What?" Alexis's voice cracked with outrage. "This house. But you and Grandpa built this place. All my best memories are here." Sandra spoke quietly. "Charles mentioned something about Sunset Manor. He said it was for your own good. Did he mention the forged power of attorney or the fact that they'd already calculated how much money they'd each get from selling everything your grandfather and I owned?" The color drained from Sandra's face. "Forged." I showed them the documents Daniel had examined, watching Sandra's expression change from discomfort to horror as she processed what her husband's family had done. "Oh, God," she whispered. "Charles kept talking about arrangements and how we needed to be prepared for when you couldn't take care of yourself anymore. I thought he meant wills and estate planning, not conspiracy to commit fraud. Alexis grabbed my hand. Grandma, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. When they said you were sick, I believed them. I should have come sooner. You're here now, I said, squeezing her fingers. That's what matters. We sat in comfortable silence for a while. 3 generations of women who'd been damaged by the same family's greed in different ways. Finally, Sandra spoke. What happens now? To Nancy and Lisa, I mean. They'll face charges for financial elder abuse and forgery. The FBI is handling the fraud case, and my lawyer is dealing with the forged documents. As for what happens to them personally, I shrugged. That's up to the courts. And Charles? Sandra's voice was barely a whisper. That depends on how involved he was. The evidence suggests he was part of the planning, but he didn't directly commit the fraud. Sandra nodded slowly. He's been talking about divorce lawyers. He says Nancy has embarrassed the family and destroyed his reputation. The irony wasn't lost on me. Charles, who'd been perfectly happy to help plan my financial exploitation, was now concerned about his reputation. What will you do? I asked her. I don't know. The house is in both our names, but with legal fees and the scandal, I might lose everything anyway. She looked up at me with eyes that held more vulnerability than I'd ever seen from her. I was wondering, I know this is presumptuous, but would you consider renting out your spare room? I could help with expenses, and Alexis could visit more easily. The request caught me off guard, but not in a bad way. For the first time in months, someone wasn't asking to take something from me. Sandra wasn't asking for control, or money, or power. She was offering companionship. Contribution. Something real. I looked around the house, the home Bruce and I had built, now filled again with the sounds of voices, clinking coffee cups, and distant laughter as Alexis opened the creaky cabinet where I kept my cookie tins. Let me think about it, I said after a long pause. But, yes. Maybe. Tears welled up in Sandra's eyes, but she blinked them back with practiced grace. Thank you. Alexis grinned. Best news ever. We spent the rest of the day going through old photo albums, ones my daughters hadn't looked at in years. I watched Alexis trace her finger over pictures of Bruce, of holidays in this very kitchen, of a childhood she still cherished even when the adults around her had forgotten what mattered. That evening, I stood at the edge of my garden, the sky painted in twilight lavender and peach, and I thought about what freedom really meant. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't even justice, though that had its place. It was standing here, whole and unbroken, choosing what came next, not reacting, not surviving, but choosing. Inside, my phone buzzed one last time. Unknown number, we'll never forgive you for this. You'll die alone. I didn't respond. Because I wasn't alone. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I needed anyone's forgiveness for reclaiming what had always been mine, my dignity, my home, and my voice. I walked back inside, closed the door gently, and turned off the porch light behind me. The end.